I'm very pleased when I was asked to be a moderator, and I was given the choice of the dark night of the soul or Mother Earth, and I said, well, they're so interrelated, it doesn't matter to me. So then I ended up somehow doing both. And I think it's a perfect timing in this festival. From my perspective, this topic ties together many of the themes that have been coming up already. It's so connected with teachings on interdependence and wholeness. Nature is a wonderful teacher about those qualities. It provides, it recycles, takes care. Also, it's connected with what's come up as the quality of devaluing the feminine, privileging the mind over the heart and the body. It's also connected with the topic of suffering and the dark night of the soul and the ways that we perpetuate suffering and can hopefully alleviate suffering. It's also connected with the topic that has come up about addiction, our addiction to consumerism and our own needs to the detriment of those of others and of the world in which we live, are all contributions to the problems that we face in our relationship with one another, between the genders, and with the earth. The earth is a great teacher of humility, a provider of both joy and sorrow. In my tradition, in the Buddhist tradition, it is said that we should emulate the qualities of the earth, provides freely to support life in all its forms, and without complaining, without agendas, and without any display of personal preference or interest. So the Mother Earth, from which we all come, which all return, and is deserving of our gratitude, love, respect, and care. So with that, I would like to introduce our three panelists. On the far end is A Woman Stands Shining, otherwise known as Pat McCabe, who is a Diné or Navajo mother, grandmother, activist, artist, writer, ceremonial leader, and international speaker. She is a voice for global peace, and her paintings are created as tools for individual, earth, and global healing. She draws upon the deep indigenous sciences of thriving life to reframe questions about sustainability and balance. She is devoted to supporting the next generations, the women's nation and the men's nation, in being functional members of the hoop of life and upholding the honor of being human. On the near side is Lynne Twist, who is a global visionary, committed to alleviating poverty, ending world hunger, and supporting social justice and environmental sustainability. Through a variety of experiences, ranging from working with Mother Teresa in Calcutta to advising some of the world's wealthiest families on philanthropy, Lynne has gained a deep understanding of people's relationships with money. She is the author of The Soul of Money, co-founder of the Pachamama Alliance, and founder of the Soul of Money Institute. And in the center, we have Reverend,
I'm here anyway. Okay.
Rabbi.
Oh, there you are. I found you. Reverend Nina Beth Cardin. Rabbi is an author and environmental activist. In 1988, she was ordained by the Jewish Theological Seminary. Over the course of her professional life, she founded the Jewish Women's Resource Center. From 2000 and 2009, she was a general consultant to the Coalition on the Environment and Jewish Life. In 2011, she founded the Baltimore Orchard Project, which grows and distributes fruit to the poor in Baltimore. So we'll begin with Women's Sun Shining. Thank you.
So I did a little inquiry this morning, and I asked, Mama, what would you have me say this morning? I have an opportunity to speak to the people. And she said, daughter, speak your love. Speak your love. And that's easy to do on this subject. So we say this Mother Earth gives us everything we need to take care of everyone that we love. How precious is that? She gives us everything we need to take care of everyone we love. And maybe this Mother Earth was provided as part of that provision of a higher power. So I acknowledge that one also. But, for many of the cultures, indigenous cultures that I have spent time with and encountered, oftentimes we say that the woman, the earth, and life are synonymous. And for those of you who are feeling a little uncomfortable about that, you'll have to refer back to the first day in which I was talking about how gender is so connected to power that when we say something like that in modern culture, we might say, well, what about this, and what about that, and where does that leave me? So just refer back a couple days if you would, because we're going to talk about it in a new way today. And so, so it's not an uncomfortable thing for us to acknowledge that in the places that I come from, the woman is synonymous with life. And that's why how we treat the woman, correlates directly to how we treat the earth, which correlates directly to how we view life. So our question for me, in some ways, and why I'm willing to travel and travel and travel, is to keep posing this question. Do we want this life? Do we want this life? And if we want this life, how do we treat it? And when we ask that, we have to ask, how do we treat this earth? How do we treat the women? So, and then it kind of goes the other direction. I was actually leading a journey for the Pachamama Alliance, which Lynne Twist is one of the founders of, and we were standing in front of this long lake, and I was drumming, because I was told to pray into the water makes that prayer move in a kind of a exponential way. So we as women were praying out at this lake, and for the first time, I've heard it as an intellectual idea, but this was the first time it really came into my embodiment, and it was so overwhelming, because what I heard was, because this lake was so beautiful, and we suddenly have storks, pelicans coming to New Mexico to I guess, find refuge at this lake. And so that was kind of an amazing sight also. And for the first time, I could really feel, you are looking into the mirror. To look into that natural beauty is to look into the mirror. And I don't just mean that as a woman, I mean that as a human being. And then a few days after our beautiful journey ended, I went out and sat on the land, which is part of our prayer tradition, to fast and pray and sit on the land. And everywhere I looked, I just had this overwhelming experience to look at the juniper tree, to listen to the sound of the hawk crying over me, to watch the ants, to just see all of this beauty. And it made me cry. And then again, I had that experience. You're looking in the mirror. You are looking at yourself. What an incredible thing. So oftentimes people will ask me, well, how do you end up with this kind of sensory way of being with the earth? How do you hear her? How do you hear these, the buffalo? How do you hear these things? And so what I would say to you, I'm going to do a little piece that I've carried into many places. And here I'm going to refer to an amazing scholar who's actually my daughter's scholastic mentor for her master's degree at the University of New Mexico, Dr. Greg Cajete. He wrote a book called Native Science. And in this book, he has this reflection, and it rocked my world, changed my world, changed my life, which I've had the honor of being able to tell him. But in it, he says, so here come all these ologists. I call them the ologists, right? Here come the ologists, and they want to study indigenous people on Turtle Island. So these were the first ones, right? And he said, so every time I read what they wrote about us, they use words like primitive and childlike. And what I love about him is he doesn't go for the low-hanging fruit, okay? He doesn't go, what a bunch of racists, he's like, there is a system of thought that is moving through these people because even though they're coming from different studies, they keep using the same language. What is this system of thought that they're operating from? That's eldership. And what he says is, well, maybe if I knew a little bit about their culture, I would understand why they say this. So he's like, so who are these guys? Because they were guys. And he said he realized these were aristocratic Englishmen, primarily. And so he said, so if I look at them in their culture, what do I notice? And he said, so for them, up until the age of 5, they're allowed to sing and dance and play and pretend. But at the age of 5, all that gets pushed back. And it's time to get down to the real business of becoming an educated man. And so at that point, the training and the focus becomes up here, right? The intellect. So this way of knowing gets honed. And it doesn't mean that those activities can't be around, but they're kind of like hobbies. They're very, very secondary. And so this is the business of becoming a man in this culture. So here come these men, and they come to Turtle Island, and they witness these indigenous people, and what are we doing? We're singing, and we're dancing. We're talking with trees. We're seeing things they don't see, and we're hearing things that they don't hear. And so to their eye, they're saying, these are, and even our grown men are engaged in these activities. And so, yeah, they say, these people must be primitive. They must be childlike, because even their grown men are engaged in the activities of children. Wow. So that was a reframe that launched so many things for me. Because then what I could also say is, so in our cultures, indigenous cultures, and you can find us everywhere on this Mother Earth, so it's not just like us over here in the Southwest United States, or, no, it's everywhere on the planet. There are human beings who from birth to death allow for all of these activities. And what I would say about them is, I think I said this the other day, but I'll repeat it here. So if sustainability is the highest and most sought after technology on the planet, who should we be talking to? We should be talking to those peoples who live in one place for an extended period of time, 1,000 years, 2,000 years, 5,000 years, 10,000 years, in relative health, harmony, and happiness. These are the premier scientists of sustainability. So what I'm starting to, here's my scientific inquiry. I would say that these people who engage in this broad spectrum of ways of knowing. So could you feel that when I'm drumming and we're singing our traveling song? Those of you who were here for the spiritual practice yesterday, I've had many people come up and say, in fact, last night on the elevator, a buffalo came into the room. She goes, not in my mind, a buffalo came in. And I was like, yeah, I know. I know, I felt it too, I see it too. And so it's opening up that perception that I believe all 5-fingered people have, not just people who look like me. And so this broad spectrum of ways of knowing that come out of the song, that come out of the dance, that come out of the listening, I believe this is intricately connected to sustainability. They go hand in hand. So this educational system that, it's been imposed upon human beings all over the world that says this is the way of knowing, has been a great inhibitor in our relationship with this Mother Earth. That's what I would propose. And so that's why I like to go ahead and not just talk about it, but let us experience that, right? And so I was walking over, and this man was asking about these feathers. Are they still here? Yeah. And we got into a conversation, and he was saying, I was telling him a little bit about what I might talk about this morning. We were walking along, and he said, well, I'm a musician. And he said, so what I notice is that everything is vibration. Everything is vibration. And I said, right. I said, wow, you've just given me a great way of explaining this. Because to explain a piece of music that Mozart wrote, you can talk about it all day long, can't you? You can say, well, there's this part, and then it gets real soft, and then it gets real loud, and then, you know what I mean? You can pantomime it. But it's not going to be experiencing, listening to this music, is it? And so this is what I would propose about this Mother Earth. We've been trained, so I'm a little schizophrenic in my we, you may have noticed. But I have been, because I was raised exactly like those Englishmen, truth be told. I was raised in the Protestant church, and I was raised in very high academics. My father went to Stanford, my brother went to Stanford, my daughter went to Stanford, my niece and nephew went to Stanford. I went to Phillips Exeter Academy in New Hampshire. So, yeah, I was set very much on that course. And I met this wild man from Taos, and everything changed. But and I have to say I have no regrets. And that was such a gift that was, because it brought me back to the land. It brought me back to having a possibility of opening to this broad spectrum of ways of knowing. And so to know this earth, and I believe this is what modern world is deeply, deeply hungering for. What's missing? What's missing? What's missing, we say. I believe it's that relationship. And we've been stunted in a way in our perception of realizing how magical a place we've been set into, how mysterious a place we have been set into. I believe that Creator loved our kind so much that Creator would set us down into such a place. And so you can see this jewelry I have on. I have shells on. I have stones, turquoise, pearl, jet. I wore this in honor of where I am today. There's cardinals in this necklace. There's buffalo on my wrist because I'm in that family. I'm in that relationship. I'm in that relationship. And so I get to have a joy in this larger community that is so far beyond my mind, that is so far beyond only my beloved humans, black, white, yellow, red, and out, extending out into what we call nature. But it's really family. It's family. And so I think that's probably my phone. I'm sorry. So I think I just wanted to start off this conversation by proposing that there's this possibility of relationship that many of us have been denied. And as I said the other day, my greatest gift to the world is being able to describe my journey back home to my own people and their understanding of who we are, where we are, and how it is. Thank you.
Thank you. Now there's a chance for our fellow panelists to chime in on this topic. It seems that introducing the very way we perceive our world has such an influence on our relationship with Mother Earth and ways of knowing. I'm thinking of people in so many people in urbanized settings and how that connection can happen. And you raised a lot of wonderful questions to start off. What would you like to add?
Well, I've known Pat for many years. We've worked together, and Women Stand Shining. And I'm always so moved by your it's almost like you're where you're standing when you say women stand shining as your name is so clearly who you are, the way you see the world. It's such a perfect name for you. And I actually wanted to know how you received that name, because it is, what you just did was stand in a way that we could see the shining power of the way you see the world, the natural world. How did you receive that name?
So I was getting ready to participate in a ceremony, and they told me I hadn't received a name. Well, I had received a name from the spirit world, but I hadn't received a name from human beings. So when this man proposed this, I thought, well, that'll be interesting to see what kind of name you give me, even though I already know a name that I have. And anyway, we were to have this larger ceremony. We were going to have a sweat lodge for the men first and then the women. And so the men went in to the sweat lodge. It's a purification ceremony. And they came out. And when you come out of this, you're pretty blissed out, really, kind of disoriented. You've been in, many things have happened, including being in this heat. And so they were just kind of talking, and they were open-hearted. It's very beautiful. But nevertheless, it was time for the women to sweat. And so I said to the woman I had asked to lead the women's lodge, I said, do you think we should just start, even though, they're not seeming to know that we're waiting to go in? And she said, yeah, I think we should. And so there's a song that we sing in preparation to go in. And so I was on the ground, and I was doing what we do before we go in, and I started singing this song. And it was kind of getting towards sunset, and the sun happened to drop down below the clouds at that moment and shone on me as I was singing this song. And when I started singing the song, the men, they recognized that song as the beginning, and they kind of came to, and they, oh, right, it's time for the women to pray. And so they backed off to the side and allowed the women to come in and start. And so the next day, the man who was watching this gave me the name Wayakpa Najiwi, which is one translation is woman stand shining. It's not necessarily an easy name to translate into English. And so it had to do with the way that sun came and shone on me. But I also believe it's referring to being the woman who is letting the men know that it's time for the women to pray.
So I wanted to pick up on your focus on language and names. In the Bible, Adam, which is translated as Adam, but it's not. The first time it's used, it really means humanity, all humanity. Adam is related to, so all humanity is related to Adama, the Hebrew word for earth. So Adam is made from Adama. In Genesis 1 and 2, you can look at the story of creation. We are not just intimately related to earth, we are earth. I mean, the identity is complete. And then if you go to Eve, life, women as life, the Hebrew name of Eve is Chava, and Chava means life. Eve is the mother of all life. So it translates into our tradition as well. And I wanted to pick up on your sense of water as mirror. There's just a beautiful confluence of meanings in the Hebrew word mikvah. Mikvah is a pool of water. It's the pool of water that is the restorative and renewing, cleansing and healing pool of water that you go to for ritual purposes. But mikvah also means hope. So it is the pooling of water and the collection of all of these drops and rain and in this gorgeous, reflective, cleansing area is also a symbol of hope. And one more thing as you were talking about the music. The Psalms, there are 150 Psalms, and a lot of the Psalms are people pouring out their hearts in pain and sorrow and anguish and asking God for hope and healing. But the very end of the 150 Psalms, the last few Psalms, are absolutely just an explosion of music. It's all the hallelujah stuff at the very end of the Psalms, you know. It's hallelujah, and in our Jewish prayers we sing that with really with joy and rapture, and it is the music that ultimately just transforms the prayer. The words of the Psalms are beautiful, but it's the music at the end that really sort of kicks it over the goal line, you know.
Beautiful.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Lynne Twist.
Well, you always impact me so much that I'm going to tell my story of coming home, I realized. And could you bring the house lights up just a teeny bit, please, so I can see people? Thank you. I have never thought of it quite this way. In fact, it's so impactful being with you. I worked on hunger and poverty for 25 years. India, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, all of sub-Saharan Africa, Ethiopia, Namibia. I was running operations for the Hunger Project in 50 countries, 50. And I was very deeply engaged in that work and thought that I would do that for the rest of my life. I had a very close relationship with Mother Teresa, just like a dream for a young woman who was raised Catholic. And we discovered very early on in the work of the Hunger Project that the key intervention for ending world hunger is the empowerment of women and girls. That is more powerful than anything in actually shifting the relationship that will end hunger and poverty. And my friend John Perkins, who I'd known for many years, asked me why we weren't working on environmental issues. And I wasn't even thinking about environmental issues. I was working on hunger and poverty, and I was lifting the status of women and girls. And it just didn't occur to me that the environment would be part of that. And he was working on the environment in the Amazon. And so well, that's your work, it's not my work. But he said, well, it's everybody's work, you'll see, because the original oppression of the feminine is the desecration of Mother Earth. That's where it all began. When we started to think we could dominate and control the earth herself, that was the beginning of the domination of women and girls. I'd never seen that before. And it was shortly after that through a whole series of mystical circumstances, I was invited to do some work in Guatemala where we hadn't been working. And John Perkins was part of this delegation, and we had the opportunity to do a shamanic ceremony with one of the greatest Mayan shamans in that country, a man named Roberto Pose. And I'd never been in a shamanic ceremony. This was 1994. I didn't know what to expect. But we laid down around a giant fire in the middle of on the top of a mountain at midnight in a very, very dark night in Guatemala, not far from Totonicapan, if you know Guatemala. And the shaman didn't speak English or Spanish, but he spoke Mayan, and John could kind of translate. So the shaman told us to lie around the fire with our feet towards the fire like a big wagon wheel. He told us to journey. I didn't know what that meant, but it seemed like I should close my eyes, and I did. And the shaman was singing the way Pat sings, but in a Mayan way, and drumming the way Pat drums in a Mayan way. And the sound of this man's voice, and the drumming, and the crackling of the fire, and the night air. And I started to go into some sort of a altered state. And my right arm started to quiver, and I felt it expand into this giant, giant wing, and I had to extend it. And then my left arm started to quiver, and it seemed to turn in this giant wing. And then I felt this beak grow on my face, and I just had to fly. I just had to fly. There was no way I could stay where I was. And as I lifted myself above this campfire setting in slow motion, I looked down and I saw everyone around the fire, including myself lying down there, and I could hear the shaman's voice, this chanting in my ear, and the drumming, and I began to fly into the starry, starry night sky. And I was flying in slow motion, and it was just glorious and incredible. And then it started to dawn, and I looked down, and I saw that I was flying over a vast, 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 unending forest of green. It was magnificent. It was forever. And as I looked down into the top of the trees, I could see all the way down to the forest floor, and I could see little critters. I had a cute vision. And then I would look up, and there would be the vast forest. And at a certain point, as I was flying in kind of slow motion, these disembodied faces of men with orange geometric face paint on their faces and yellow, red, and black feather crowns on their heads started to float up from the forest floor through the canopy to the bird, calling to this bird in a strange tongue. And then they would disappear back into the forest. And I would fly a little bit farther, and then they would reappear with these strange faces and this strange language calling to the bird. And then they would disappear. And this went on and on until I heard a loud drum beat. And I opened my eyes and sat up and realized I was a human being. And I looked around the circle, and everybody was sort of disoriented. They all had gone somewhere. And then the shaman wanted to hear what had happened to each of us, and each person had shared that they'd become some sort of an animal. And when it was my turn, I shared my story with this shaman. He looked kind of weird at me, and he was kind of a weird-looking guy. And then it ran around the circle to my friend John, and John had the same vision that I did. And when the ritual was over, the shaman sat with John and I, and he said, "You're being called. You're being called. That wasn't a normal vision. You're being called by a people, and you must go to them." Didn't make any sense to me. I was working in Africa and India. I had no time to go to whoever these people were, but John knew exactly who they were and where they were. And he said, "Lynne, they're the Achuar people. They're in Ecuador, in the heart of the world, right in the equator. They've had no contact, and I know from my Shuar brothers, because I was just in the Amazon, that's where he worked, that the Achuar are ready for contact, and they're calling for contact now, and we need to go to them." I said, "No way, I'm ending world hunger. I'm not done." You do that. But those visions, they didn't stop. I went on to Africa. The visions came to me when I was flying in the plane. They came to me when I was sitting in meetings. They came to me at night when I was dreaming. They never stopped until I finally went down to Quito, down the Valley of the Volcanoes, over the eastern side of the Andes with John, down the Pastaza River Canyon, and flew with a small plane into Achuar territory for our first encounter with the Achuar people. And that encounter totally changed my life and is the source of an organization called the Pachamama Alliance. The word Pachamama means Mother Earth, or the earth, the sky, the universe, and all time. And the Pachamama Alliance is an alliance between the indigenous peoples of the sacred headwaters region of the Amazon and conscious, committed people in the modern world like all of you for the ultimate sustainability of life itself. And that work now is the work that I do. That's the source of the communication to change the dream of the modern world, to wake up from the trance in which we live, and to connect with Mother, the Great Mother, the natural world, in a way that we all come home. And in that encounter, in that first encounter with those remarkable people, I began to see that we had not only been called by the Achuar, we had been called by the forest itself. And then we realized the more we worked in the Amazon, that we were being called by the Spirit of Life, the Great Mother. That's who called us there. And now my life, the way I see the world, thank God, is so imbued and informed by the natural world. And in recent years, the last 2 or 3 years, we found out that the place that we were called, which we didn't know where it was, who these people were in the beginning, we were totally clueless. We, as my husband and I, who went with me, Bill, we have been called to what's called the sacred headwaters region of the Amazon rainforest. The Amazon rainforest is the largest rainforest and ecosystem on Earth. It's larger than the United States. It spans 9 countries. It is huge. It's huge. And it's it is the engine of the global climate. It is the source of life. And we were called to the sacred headwaters, which is the source of the Amazon rainforest, which is the source of the climate system. It ends up, we were called to the source of the mother itself. And this place now, which has been defended, we've been there for 23 years. The indigenous people there, the Achuar, the Shuar, the Shiwiar, the Zapara, the Waorani, the Quichuas, they have only a few 100,000, 100 people here, 1,000 people here left of their people. Yet they have repelled and kept out the largest entities on this planet, the huge oil companies. This area is still pristine, roadless. BP has tried to get in there, Chevron, Texaco, you name it. And 12 oil companies have not gotten into this territory. It's unbelievable. It's impossible. It's a David and Goliath miracle for 23 years. And in the last 2 years, it's become clear that this particular stand of rainforest, this roadless, pristine stand of rainforest, southern Ecuador and northern Peru, is the sacred headwaters, the source of the entire Amazon system, the source of what are called the flying rivers. Every tree, a mature tree, emits 1,000 liters of water into the air every day, which is the source of the rain machine on the entire planet. So I'm going to show you a very short 2-minute video, some clips of this region so that you can relate to what I call the source of life. This place made it through the Ice Age, the Pleistocene era, and repopulated life after the Ice Age. It can do it again if other ecosystems fail. It is the most critical ecosystem on Earth right now. They're all critical, and yet this ecosystem is pristine, untouched, and the indigenous people are standing to put it in permanent protected status. So can you roll the video, please?
Where the Andes Mountains descend into the Amazon basin, at the very headwaters of the Amazon River, we find one of the most critical opportunities for intervention. The indigenous peoples who live there consider the region sacred and for decades have diligently protected it from the constant threat of incursion by extractive industries. Now, a global alliance is forming to support their call for permanent protected status of this critical region. What happens to the headwaters affects the entire river basin. Teeming with life, these sacred headwaters are also treasured by biologists, for it is here that they have discovered the highest levels of biodiversity for plants, birds, mammals, and amphibians in all of the Amazon basin, and very likely in the entire world. For example, in 1 hectare of rainforest here, there are more tree species than in all of the US and Canada combined. The Amazon Sacred Headwaters Initiative supports indigenous peoples' continued stewardship of this ecologically, culturally, and spiritually significant region. It aims to establish a globally recognized and protected biocultural sanctuary for the future of all life.
Proteger las cuencas sagradas es una gran esperanza para proteger la diversidad biológica y cultural de nuestro territorio, incluso para salvar la vida de la humanidad.
The initiative will engage the governments and civil society of Ecuador and Peru, as well as the global community, and negotiate solutions based on the twin goals of protecting living systems and advancing human well-being.
La recientemente creada iniciativa de las cuencas sagradas del Napo y del Marañón pretenden constituirse en una región biocultural, un santuario de la biodiversidad, un lugar en donde los pueblos indígenas pueden ejercer sus procesos de autodeterminación y gobernar de una manera diferente sus territorios, un lugar en donde los indicadores del buen vivir pueden realmente dar paso a un nuevo momento de desarrollo en el lugar más biodiverso del planeta.
So in a way, that trip to Guatemala took me home to the mother, the Great Mother. And this work to protect the sacred headwaters of the Amazon rainforest and working very deeply with Indigenous people, particularly, I'll say, Indigenous women, who are really the keepers of the forest, the keepers of the spirit of life, has informed and inspired and empowered the work of the Pachamama Alliance, where we actually now deeply, deeply listen in a way that I never knew I could or that I needed to, the messages of the natural world. You know, this beautiful place where you are is the home of Wendell Berry, who's one of the great heroes of the environment in the whole world. And to really... and to be in the presence of Wendell Berry, which I was yesterday and I think we will be today, is a huge gift. And to understand the way he communes with the natural world, the way he listens to the Great Mother, the way Woman Stands Shining listens to the Great Mother, the way that actually we all do when we stop, when we're silent, when we open our hearts, when we recognize that the greatest teacher of all is right in front of us, everywhere we go, at every moment. And that this is the divine feminine speaking to us now. This time I call the Sophia Century, when it's time to really listen to her, to allow her to nourish us and to nourish her right back at a time when she's calling for our full participation, our full partnership, our full responsibility to be the human beings she knows we can be. So I'm honored, privileged, and delighted to be part of a festival of faith that is opening our hearts to having that faith in the natural world that will carry us into the long-term future of life. Thank you.
Well, thank you for that. It's such an amazing initiative in helping, being an ally or supporter of this movement in the headwaters of the Amazon. And I love the way that you combined the intuitive or mystical with the practical and the notion of calling, being called, and trusting that sense of being called, as opposed to the more top-down, trying to figure out and plan what you're going to do, receiving some message and then going with it. So I applaud you for that. And I think it's a very feminine way of going about things. Very powerful. Thank you.
The Indigenous people, when we first encountered them, they said, if you're coming to help us, even though we invited you here, don't waste your time. Mm-hmm. But if you're coming because you know your liberation is bound up with ours, then let's work together.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And
Great.
That's the foundation
Thank
of
you.
the work.
Yeah.
Well, I certainly applaud you for your bravery, because when we might be blessed with visitations of these visions, most of us are going to run the opposite direction. But I guess yours continually prodded you until you couldn't say no. Have you had any other visions that move you?
Well, yes, because now I'm open to that. I mean, I couldn't deny that because it didn't stop until we actually went there.
Right.
But once that portal was affirmed and validated, you almost say, I could say,
right,
by the mind, my mind. And I'd had, I was open to that before. I was the chairman of the Institute of Noetic Sciences. I've been working in meditation for many years, but this particular portal wasn't open until then, and now it is. And Indigenous peoples of the Amazon and Women Stand Shining can talk about this, are very, very, very sophisticated people. They're incredibly sophisticated with the dream reality, really sophisticated with dream interpretation, understanding what dreams are in ways that are quite different from what I'd ever heard before. And so when we're with them, every morning, 2 hours before sunrise, the family convenes. They drink a particular tea called Wayusa. And then after that tea ceremony, every single person in the family shares their dream. And then the elder of the family interprets the dreams, and that's how you decide what you're going to do that day. And it's absolutely certain, and you do not veer from it. And it's just incredible how sophisticated and deep that knowledge is, that the dreams are coming from somewhere they totally and completely trust. And everybody remembers their dreams. That's really incredible. So I've learned from that, and also we get involved in their sacred ceremonies, and it's just a huge portal, and ceremony is very, very important to Indigenous people, and is one of the great tasks, really, that Indigenous people are performing to help us find our way home as well. Those of us who don't realize that our roots are Indigenous also. So I have lots and lots of visions now.
You are blessed.
You know, I appreciate you talking about that being a feminine kind of modality. So the feminine aspect is to be a receiver, to be a receiver. And so more and more, as I witness our kind of mad scramble to try to figure things out, I got told by a seer a while back, your figure-in days are over, lady. You just need to open and follow now. And it's true that my way of knowing where I need to go is when I get an invitation, I just ask, is this a yes or a no? And if it's a yes, there I go. And I don't really know what is in store for me. I don't really know what the work is going to end up being. And that was true of me coming to the Festival of Faith. Happily, it was yes, and here I am, and it's a pretty amazing place to be. And so I guess part of me wants to say at this point, we don't really have any business taking any action until we receive from the wider community. So I keep talking about this wider community, which includes the rest of the whole hoop of life. We're a part of the hoop, we're not the whole hoop, but also from that larger spiritual community, whatever that might be for you. And I guess, because of my background, like I said, I was raised in Protestant church, and I find myself squirming in my seat sometimes as I think about how I might have received the things that I'm saying from that perspective. And this is a cry in my heart because I feel like and I know this is changing, but I remember, that there's a very risky place, it feels like, to acknowledge creation. Like there's Creator, and that's the source, and that's the guide, and there can be nothing else, was what I was told at that time in my life. And now I say, but is this creation also the mirror of Creator? And everything that Creator gives to me, shouldn't I treat it as precious? Shouldn't I treat it as profound, And I know that I've been told in political arenas that because of the way some people view that the mandate, what they've received from Creator, they say, we know it's all going to end anyway. So what does it matter? And for me, at this point, having journeyed across many ways of thinking and believing, I just need to name that here, that for me, to uphold the honor of being human being, just like to take care of what my physical, real-life father gave me. When he gave me jewelry, I had to take care of it. When he gave me a car, I had to take care of it. When he, in my father's house, there are many things of beauty, right? And many treasures and many riches. And for me, this creation is that. And so it's so healing for me to know that community is now saying, yes, we are going to be stewards of this Mother Earth. And now that I've come this far into my Indigenous way of knowing, I guess we could call it, I believe that I'm being stewarded. by this Mother Earth in many ways. But I just felt the need to speak that because it's a place that is very tender for me here.
Thank you. Okay, we have one final speaker, Rabbi.
I'm going to use the podium, so I'm cueing the video, guys. Well, first, it is an extraordinary honor to be on the panel with the two of you. I watch you on videos, I read about you, and for me to be here as part of you is really a true honor. So thank you for that honor. Thank you to the festival for inviting me. A nation's calendar is a tapestry of its soul written in time. Right? So if you think about a culture's calendar and a nature's calendar, think about the different threads of the days that make it up. They're bright threads of celebration, and they're more muted threads for loss. And so if you really want to know what a culture cherishes in space, in their relationship to Earth and others, see what they honor in time. So what was fascinating to me as I was going through the story of the Exodus at one point is that just before the Jews leave Egypt, when God is giving Moses his sort of final instructions, God says, make this month the first of months. Essentially, God is saying, erase the calendar that you know, erase the calendar of the oppressor, erase the structure of time that you've experienced here in Egypt, and make time new. Name it fresh for you. So that if you look at a calendar, you know what a culture values. And in thinking about this panel and looking at the Jewish calendar, there are 3 major holidays that we call the pilgrimage holidays, the regalim, when the Jews went up to Jerusalem, the temple, to celebrate. And they were all agricultural holidays. They all depended on the various seasons of the year, 3 times, scattered throughout the year. So one of the things that we did in our Jewish calendar, and I hope that this answers you somewhat, maybe comforts you somewhat, is that the Jewish calendar is grounded in an understanding of the cycles and the seasons and the holidays. And we celebrate in our homes and in our congregations and our community the earthiness of it. The Jewish people is grounded in earth. I mean, Abraham, I'll get to creation in a minute, but Abraham was called to be the first Jew by God saying, Lech lecha, get up out of this place, because this place is not conducive. It is about community. This community in this place is not conducive to you becoming the nation that I want you to be, and go to this place. And in our Jewish calendar, just at the tipping edge, the end of winter, we have a holiday called Tu B'Shvat. It goes back 2,000 years. Tu B'Shvat, it's a date in the calendar. It's the 15th of the month of Shvat, but it is the new year of the trees. We celebrate the fact that the trees have lives and they age, and you can't do certain things to the trees if they're too young, and you have to cherish them as they get older. So we have this holiday in our sacred calendar, which is the new year of the trees. And how we celebrate it has changed over time. But I remember when I was young and in Hebrew school, and year after year after year, we were told the following story on this day of the new year of the trees, 2,000 years ago. It's a fellow named Choni Hama'agal, Choni the circle maker, who lived about a century before Jesus did. And he was seen when he was older in life, as sort of a miracle worker. But when he was younger, he was kind of this upstart kid with an attitude. I guess all miracle workers have to have some sort of an attitude. And he was walking along the road, and he sees this man. I used to think he was an old man, but now that I'm 65, I think he was probably in his 40s, So to Choni, he was this old guy. So he sees this man planting a carob tree. And Choni, knowing a little bit about agriculture or what the common sense was, he said, excuse me, sir, what are you planting? And the man said, I'm planting a carob tree. And Choni says, how long does it take for the carob tree to mature and give fruit? And the man said, it takes 70 years. And Choni said, well, excuse me again, sir, but do you think you're going to be alive in 70 years? and the man said, no. And then he said, this is in Aramaic, Ki hechi t'shatle li avhatai, shatli nami livra'ai. That is, just as my ancestors planted for me, I will plant for my children. He says, I found carob trees in this world when I was born. So people who I never knew, can never know, planted them for me. I will plant for others. What's interesting is that we were told that story year after year on Tu B'Shvat. They never told me what it meant. So I had to figure out what it meant. And I think first what it means is that we are only here, all of us, thriving, talking, living, because of Earth, because of the presence of Earth, the gift of Earth, the creation of Earth, and its generosity and its restorative nature, its healing. There would not be Choni, there would not be the man, there would not be a carob tree if there wasn't Earth. So that's one. Two, but we are not just passive recipients of Earth. We are partners in Earth. Genesis 2 says that God created humankind to tend the garden and care for the garden and protect and steward the garden. Le'avda'u l'shamra. We were put here not just to receive. We were put here to give and to protect and to work and to improve, so we have gorgeous places like this. And it teaches us that we are the beneficiaries of our ancestors, so that how we treat the land is an aspect of how we treat the other. Thomas Berry, who was one of the great Berries, we'll hear about from Mary Berry of the other Berry later this afternoon. But Thomas Berry said, "No age lives completely unto itself. Each age has only what it receives from the prior generations." It sounds so obvious, but we forget that we are the beneficiaries of prior generations. If prior generations did to us what we are doing to subsequent generations, we would not be able to live the life of blessing that we live today. So we have to be responsible. So the second thing is, as we are the recipients of prior generations, so we are the ancestors of future generations. And how we, this is where I also get choked up, how we as people who are living in the most golden era of history can treat the earth and therefore each other in such a shabby way just breaks my heart. It means that we are not demonstrating the gratitude that we need. Liberty Hyde Bailey, how many of you have heard of Liberty Hyde Bailey? Right, your homework is to Google Liberty Hyde Bailey. There is a free ebook online called This Holy Earth. Liberty Hyde Bailey lived at the turn of the 20th century, and he was an agronomist. He worked actually for Theodore Roosevelt to help people reconnect to the county, the country, the land, because there was this great urbanization then. It's a fabulous spiritual book called This Holy Earth. He said, "One does not act rightly toward one's fellows if one does not know how to act rightly toward the earth." So the way that we, as you were saying, the way that we act toward the earth is a demonstration of the way that we act to the other. Genesis 1 knows this. We do. Our tradition, our Judeo-Christian tradition does know the fact that we are dependent on creation. Genesis 1 is it's a paean. It's a revelatory explosion of the beauty of creation. Each day, right, the story goes through each day of creation. And each day of creation, except for one, then it gets a double one on the other end, but at any rate, relatively, each day of creation is blessed by God. What does God say with each day of creation? It is good. It is good, which means that each and every element of creation in and of itself has value. It's not there for us. It is not there so that we can consume it or use it as a commodity or trade it or some otherwise abuse it. Each and every element of creation is of value, but then we get to the sixth day where humans come to. And what does God say about that day? It is very good. What does that mean? It means that while each and everything has its unique inherent value, it is when we all come together in relationship as a whole, as systems that work and thrive. That's the ultimate blessing. It is very good. Now, very good is not perfect. We still have to work. I mean, that's part of, I think, the human calling, is that we take the very good and then God hands this over, this very good creation, God hands this over to us. And it is our calling to strive to make it even better. That's what we are supposed to do. We are not here to dominate. You know, we are often told that the Judeo-Christian tradition is one of the causes of the desecration of the earth. Why? Because it says in Genesis 1 that we should have, we should subdue and have dominion over the earth. But what does it also say there? That we are made in the image of God. And at that moment that we are told that we should have dominion over the earth, we are told that we are also made in the image of God. And what is the image of God at that point in time, up to that point in the story? God is creator, God is life giver, God is sustainer. So we are taking over the power. We cannot neglect the fact that we have great power as human beings, but we should use that power as God used God's power to sustain and create and to bless. And we know that because right after we're given that blessing of that power, what's the very next thing that happens in the story? The seventh day. And what's the seventh day? The day of rest. So just as we're being given that great power that God says, okay, now you have this great gift of capacity and dreaming and, ambition. And what do you have to do? Sit and think about what it's all about. And there was a great rabbi, Abraham Joshua Heschel, a 20th century rabbi, who says, to gain control of the world of space is certainly one of our tasks. We are not here to be passive. We are here to be active as active partners in God's grand scheme of life. It is the way that we create society and abundance and fulfillment of destinies. But creation, those 6 days when we're to work, is not everything. Sabbath is there to restrain the excesses of work. And Heschel says, in this way, defining in the most beautiful way I know, Sabbath, there is a realm of time where the goal is not to have, but to be, not to own, but to give, not to control, but to share, and not to subdue, but to be in accord. And in fact, the Sabbath is not what a lot of people think. Oh, yeah, you work 6 days, you're exhausted, you rest, you can get back up and work another 6 days in a hectic fashion, then you rest, you can work back. It's just the opposite. We work 6 days so that on the Sabbath we can live for a moment that precious goal of life when we all feel we have enough, we are full, we are released from this incessant desire of needing more. It's when we feel we have all that we need. That is why we rest, because there's a fullness of spirit and a fullness of resources, a fullness of relationship. So the Sabbath is that vision, the rabbis call it a vision of the world to come. It's that moment and place and time when we are full. We have sova. We don't want any more. I have about 3 pages left of notes in about 2 minutes. So I'm gonna quickly just run through this next thing. Judaism just doesn't teach this in the creation stories. It inscribes this in our agricultural laws. As I say, we are a people of the land, and we have 3 holidays where we remind ourselves of that. But every season of farming, the Jewish Bible also says you have to understand your place in the earth. When a farmer farms and then harvests, he or she has to understand that there are times when elements of his produce is not his. We have 3 levels of giving that remind us that everything that we grow is not only because of us and we don't own it exclusively. They're peah, leket, and shichacha. And just to run real fast through it, peah are the corners of the field. How many of you have read these parts of the Bible and know about this? Peah are the corners of the field. What the Jewish law says is that as a farmer, you must farm your entire field as you would for yourself, as if you were the beneficiary of it. But you must also leave the corners of your field for those who need, so that they can come and harvest in dignity. And you can't scrimp on the sides. You got to put as much seed on the corners as you would in the center. You can't scrimp on the water, But what does it say? It means from the moment you begin to plow, from the moment that you put seeds down there, you understand that you are only a piece of the productivity and creation of the world. that there is God's hand in it, that there is rich soil in it, that there is sun, that there is water, and that you are just a piece, an enabler of the earth to be as fertile as it can be. And then there are two others, the leket and shichacha. As you harvest, if you harvest, and as you harvest you drop your produce, you must leave it there for the poor. Why? Because it teaches us you can't be such gluttons. There is an aspect of enoughness. You should know when to say enough. And if you harvest too much and you grab, anyway, I can go on about this, but if it's a beautiful vision. Know what is just what you need and know what you had to share. And then shichacha is what you forget in the field. If you've harvested and you gather and you put your sheaves down and then you sort of go and you go back into your home with all the other sheaves and you've put it in the threshing floor and you forgot a sheaf, it means you don't really need it. And if you're so full that you're forgetful, you must leave that for the poor. So I bring this all up because it says in our very activities, remember farming, agriculture was the prime economic activity back then. And what Judaism is saying is in your primary activity, you must realize that you are just a partner. You are a piece. You are a steward. And everything that we have must be shared by everyone. Everyone owns a piece of the land. Everyone owns a piece of the harvest. Everyone must be supported by everyone else. So if I were to be challenged by Choni today, he'd probably think I'm an ancient woman. I would say to Choni, yes, we are the planters. And as my ancestors planted for me, so I will plant for them. So it is written in my calendar, so it is written in my ways of the land, and so it is written in my soul. Thanks.
Thank you. It's so interesting to hear from the different perspectives, and it seems to me that our attitude to the earth is reflected in everything we do, our most simple gestures to our more collective strategies, so to speak. And I was given 3 guidelines at one point and saw them in action as always make offering, always never take, ask permission, and always express gratitude for the things that we utilize in our lives. Mm-hmm. I'd like to ask if any of you would like to make comments, and we can then open it up to the general stories and questions in the audience. There is a standing mic right over there and a standing mic there.
Well, I'd like to say that it's been a great discovery on my part. I'm sure other people have known it for a long time, but to really understand that, from my perspective, Judaism is an indigenous people, indigenous culture, very earth-based, very acknowledging of that. And so I always love hearing from this very, very ancient understanding of that relationship and many other relationships as well. So first of all, I want to acknowledge that. But I'm loving this part. I forgot about this. I had heard this about the leaving the corners of the garden, of the garden. And it reminds me of our clan relationship. So my clan grandfather, who left us last year, said, the United States is in double-digit unemployment right now, and they're freaking out. And he goes, but here, where he lived in Tzedakon, which is by Shiprock, New Mexico, he said, we've had 50% unemployment for decades. He said, so how do we do it? He says, we do it through our clan system. Mm-hmm. So I actually haven't introduced myself by clan since I arrived. My daughter did, so I felt like that was sufficient. But so we get our clans from our mothers. And so if I were to introduce myself by my clan, then in a room full of Dene, then people would come up to me immediately afterwards and say, oh, you're my grandmother, or I'm your sister, or, and right away we have this relationship. So this is a family that extends beyond the immediate family, mother, father, brothers, sisters, even beyond cousins. This is going into an ancestral lineage, right? And so the reason that clan system can address something like 50% unemployment is we say, my well-being is tied with your well-being. Exactly. I cannot be well if you are not well. And so while modern world might not necessarily have clan systems, I believe we can create these clan systems for ourselves. But just that principle of, I can't be well if you're not well, changes a lot, right? So I always appreciate that. Yeah.
Excuse me, I forgot. We have a stretch before we continue the rest of our conversation, because actually we are in bodies.
Yeah, right.
Is it a formal stretch or we just, okay?
The, hello. An artist interlude.
Oh, we do.
Will that hold, be fun? Do you want to do that first?
Yeah, can I just,
Oh.
because she just spoke.
Okay. Okay, that's fine. Yeah.
Thank you for the stretch break. I just wanted to say it's so beautiful to hear you talk about the scriptures, the teachings from the perspective that you have. Really, really appreciate that. And one of the things that I so admire about the Jewish religion is all the ceremonies and traditions and how people are practicing them and respect them so much. I really appreciate that. I wanted to say the thing about the four corners too. That's so great. I've heard that before, but I didn't really grok it the way I did today. But I want to say that in the work that we do in with the indigenous people of the rainforest, everything is communally owned. Nobody has any possessions. So people don't own things. So everything is communally owned. The whole sacred headwaters region is communally owned by all those indigenous people, and their job is to be the custodians of that, not only for themselves, but for the future of life. So that way of being creates a well-being for everyone, because the highest commitment is the health and well-being of what you're stewarding, not only for yourselves, but for the future of life. And it creates a very, very powerful relationship with the resources. In fact, even using the word resources is kind of almost shocking. Yeah, it's like that we're supposed to take somehow. And then one of the things that I'm very proud of that Pachamama Alliance has had a hand in Ecuador is the first country in the world that's given legal rights to nature under fundamental primary law. So forest systems and river systems can be defended in court with an attorney. And that now has spread throughout the world, and it's a complete rearranging of our relationship with property rights. And it's a legal breakthrough, not only legal breakthrough, but it's you can feel that is the future.
Absolutely.
That is where we're going. So, and I really appreciated the way you spoke about your traditions, because I think that's also a forecasting of where we're headed.
Thank you. Do I have a minute to respond?
I think we should do this, and then we can continue on, because it's an important part of the way of presenting in Festival of Faith to include the arts and include other ways of knowing and expressing. So it's part of the program. I think it's important, and we'll continue, of course, and have time to talk further, right? So I wanted to introduce Susan Patrice, who's a documentary photographer, teacher, and community arts organizer whose work is nourished and inspired by rural life and the rich culture of Southern Appalachia. Her photography, which focuses primarily on the Southern landscape and its people, features intimate images that touch deeply into the questions of place, gender, and race. Her current work, facilitated through the construction of hand-built cameras that capture expansive, feminine, round images on film, explores the nature of visual perception and its impact on our feelings of alienation and belonging. She lives in Marshall, North Carolina, where she's director of Makers Circle, a residency, retreat, and workshop center for photographers and makers. So please welcome Susan Patrice for the Arts Interlude.
Thank you. I'm so touched by this conversation today. And in particular, Woman Stand Shining, and your talk about the sensory way of experiencing the earth, and this idea of opening our perception. And so what I'd like to share with you briefly is the story of how I was able to call on the power of photography, gestural and somatic prayer, and most importantly, the Indigenous wisdom teachers that have informed the work that I do, and the love of the earth herself to begin what I consider my slow and steady return home to the sacred feminine. The current project that I'll talk to you about started in the winter of 2015. I had not gone there to actually take photographs. It was much like the Appalachian landscape itself. My body holds this map of multi-generational trauma, and part of that trauma includes violence against women mirrored in our exploitation of the land. And so it was actually my therapist's suggestion. She said, I'm going to send you to the earth. You're going to spend the hours a day doing these somatic gestural prayers in hopes that it would heal both my psyche and my body. So on one of these trips to the forest, I was listening to the On Being podcast, and the work of Robin Wall Kimmerer came up. And if you don't know her, she is this amazing plant ecologist and the founding director of the Center for Native Peoples and the Environment. I was listening, and Robin asked this powerful question. She said, do you think the earth loves you back? Right? She went on to say that for us to truly contemplate this question, we needed to accept that the earth had agency and that we were known, deeply known, right, by our home place. And while considering the earth's love for me, it sort of turned everything upside down. And I realized as a photographer that I had walked through this doorway of reverence and wonder, but I hadn't walked through the doorway of reciprocity. So I started to wonder, what would a collaborative relationship with the earth look like if she were to join with me in making these photographs? And Robin went on to suggest that we quite literally needed to change our way of seeing. She suggested that we would see through different eyes. And I thought, what is it about her indigenous wisdom way of knowing that allows her to see into the love of the earth itself? And that question allowed me to enter the woods very differently that day. Instead of praying in the forest, I started to pray with the forest. And what happened was really fascinating. I had been to an herbal conference earlier that year, and I was taught this exercise of expanding peripheral vision. And basically what one does is sort of put your arms out and start expanding how far you can see. And what happened was, as my vision started to loosen and I started to expand, this feeling of belonging, deep belonging, washed over me. And suddenly my eyes would snap back, this very narrowed way of perceiving and seeing the world that I had learned as a photographer, focusing. And then it would relax again, and then this feeling of belonging would rush over, and then suddenly I would start to feel this separation again. And back and forth it went, and I remembered that feeling because I've birthed 3 children. And I thought, just relax. And it fell open. And my eyes suddenly could see round. And I remembered that lenses, like our eyes, are actually round. And it's this bounded, linear view of reality that holds this world in this tight and bounded view. So I was so overwhelmed. I went home, I fell asleep, I dreamed in round images, and I woke up and I thought, I'm never going to be able to shoot square and rectangular again. So I was but then burdened with this question of how do I build a camera that allows me to photograph and see in this way? And so I started sort of retrofitting cameras and slowly moving back into the woods. And I have to tell you, the best part of this is she loved the round. The second I walked into the woods with this round camera, I use it like a divining rod and I let it lead me and move me through the forest until something lights up, and I promise you, something lights up. And the question was she actually reaching forward for me? And I can't know for sure, but I have come to know that photography is this medium that reminds me that when you see through the eyes of the heart, you come back into this connected and related experience of being in the earth and with the earth. So I want to just tell you a little bit about where this project has gone. One of the things that has been most remarkable is I'm now starting to photograph on other land where people pray and people work with the land every day. And what I know is this took me a long time to get to this place, but when I enter land where prayer is already happening, where land trusts are being established, instantaneously when I take this camera out, I can immediately see the radiance and the love that the land reflects back to the people that are taking care. And so I'll just end in silence with a few of these images. And that was it. Thank you.
So, continuing our conversation, I was very struck also in the Jewish tradition, the emphasis on household and ritual, and I'm thinking of where do people start forming connections and idea of ritual and earth. It's in the household, and that's a women's realm. What are the rituals of the household, and how is the household experience in the world, greater natural world connection? What are the links? It seems that Jewish has a lot of kind of wisdom about that.
Because we were a landed indigenous people, as you call it, and yet we had thousands of years of exile, and we were kicked out of many places, and so we wandered a lot. We were not able to experience that in the land itself, so we did sort of have to bring it in, and we brought it into our calendar, and the calendar reminding us so beautifully about our connection to the land. On Tu B'Shvat, that holiday of the trees, for example, we would eat carob. We would eat the carob when we would celebrate all that. I would say perhaps the best way for us to be reminded of it is actually every Friday night on the Sabbath table, we have candles and wine and challah bread. And we have that because those reflect some of the three major harvests, produce of the land of Israel. The candles are really about the olive oil and the olive trees. The wine is about the grapes that grew so beautifully. And the challah is about the wheat. And these are the three symbolic elements of produce of the land of Israel, talking about its fertility. And we celebrate that every Friday night. Now that we're back in the land of Israel, and now that we are expanding the agricultural understanding to the diaspora, we're living it more. There are Jewish farmers in America, and there are Jewish farm camps, and there are Jewish farm schools, and so we're living it more here as they are living it in Israel. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I'm going to, two things about that, what you just brought up is, one is I went outside my house and I have all these fruit trees, like 30 fruit trees on this tiny place of land. And my mom calls it the little house in the forest. But I went out to go lean up against my peach tree in a state of confusion one time, and just to calm down. And this peach tree kind of conveyed to me, this peach tree said, "Don't worry, we understand." Because part of what I was lamenting was that I'm travel so much that I don't always get to acknowledge this fruiting and the harvesting season. So I'm always on the road, and so I was kind of explaining, kind of lamenting this to this peach tree, and this peach tree said, "No, we understand. We hear you praying. We hear you singing in the house all the time. We know what you're doing. We know where you're going, and it's okay." So for some reason that brought that up to me. But I'm going to hop on for just a moment about this business of being dispossessed of your homeland, of your people, your culture, your understanding of relationship. And so this is something that I think modern world doesn't necessarily, as you use your word, grok, is what it means to dispossess a people who have been rooted in place for thousands of years. That relationship to land is we use that word reciprocity, but there again, it kind of takes out that feeling and that heart of it. But for instance, for a young woman to be initiated, part of the big celebration, the whole community comes to a stop at the sign of her first menstruation. So that's not something you write on the calendar and say, "I think we'll do it here." No, her rhythm determines what the community is going to do. And everything comes to a stop to acknowledge this life bringer. So that life bringer is saying, that she has become one who is able to participate in that creativity of bringing life, says that our people are going to continue. And part of the celebration of that, the depth of that, the profundity of that, is that we will be able to continue in this relationship with this place. So again, with this broad spectrum of ways of knowing opened, we can listen to this land, which in our case is the desert primarily, and also involves mountains as well. But it's a desert, it's a dry, it's very different than here, let's say. And so that relationship is us reaching out and acknowledging this place of earth, and then also having that earth come back and say, and here's another possibility. And so this co-creation and reciprocity and love affair is moving back and forth between the people until our language emerges, our ceremonies begin to emerge. This is how we can celebrate this relationship. This is how we can deepen this relationship. You talk about renewal of vows in a marriage. Well, here we go with the earth, with these ceremonies, right? And so this goes on, and over thousands of years. Of course, there's an understanding of this is what we do when there's not much rain. This is what we do when there's too much rain. This is what we do, so it's this incredible relationship. And I just feel like I need to name that because in modern world, where people are living in one place for 2 years, 3 years at a time, it's really hard to understand what that relationship might look like. So that's an important thing for Indigenous people, to understand that relationship to place. In fact, my daughter would say in her anthropological work with the Winnemem-Wintu around Mount Shasta in California, they're talking about changing the dam in such a way that the waters would rise yet again. That most of their land has been flooded already, but they still have the place where they can initiate their women, which is also a part of the process for having the women's leadership come forward. And so she had an outcry with the Water Conservancy, in her work, saying, if you flood this, the Winnemem-Wintu can no longer be the Winnemem-Wintu. Period. And that's something that's very difficult for us to grasp sometimes. So I just had to hop on that, what you were talking about, what happened to your people.
And the connection to meal and
right.
land. Yeah.
And so then we begin to take a step back and do what we can to recreate those connections, but it's very different. And in a way, it can be a process of reinventing the wheel, this incredible body of knowledge. And that's where that sustainability, I think, does come from.
That's so interesting. In my tradition is Tibetan Buddhism also displaced people from their land, but they're also a nomadic tradition. So in the Tibetan culture, there's a tradition of tents and traveling from place to place, erecting a tent and creating a sacred environment on the spot, and then rolling it up, packing it up, and traveling further. And I think that notion of within this moving society, learning to create on the spot a sacred space can be perhaps helpful in the kind of lessening the sense of unrootedness, but.
We have questions from the audience too.
Okay.
Do we have questions from the audience too?
Yeah, oh, yes, I have questions from the audience. Yes, and I think I remind where the mics are, and maybe we start with this one. A little closer to the mic, maybe.
Just keep talking,
Yeah,
maybe,
just-
and they'll
yeah.
turn it on.
And hopefully we can
There you go.
hear you.
Help
There
is
you
on the way. I think it's on now. Try it. Well, maybe we could start over there and then come back to you. I was fixing the mic. Yeah.
Not either.
That's not on either?
How about just shouting?
Maybe just holler out.
Yeah. Women's
Project.
voices come, yeah.
I got in trouble all the time during study hall. Don't make it hear my voice.
It's perfect.
Anyway, thank you so much. This week has been so powerful. The thing I've been wanting to share with all of you is my awareness just recently about how we're also dispossessed and displaced. Look where we sit. Look what kind of shoes you have on. All of these barriers from the earth. So this week, my friends and I, we've been going out to the green grass and lying there. And Judy said to me, they said, "Oh, my feet didn't hurt last night." And I think it's because we lay on the grass 3 times yesterday. And y'all, there is healing just lying on the ground. I had the good fortune. Oh, I think it's working. Hello. My accent is from South Carolina. 22 years ago, was it 23? Was it 22? 23 years ago, yeah, it matters. My son left the planet. He was a student of Native American tradition, and his vision quest name was Silent Wind. When he died from a car accident, I was inconsolable. And I had the good fortune of getting my hands on a letter someone had written who had lost her son. And she said the most healing thing for her was to lie down on the mother. That's what I did. And I'm just moved now talking about it, but I am so healed from that. And it's ironic, it came to me today that as an extension of my desire to be connected with him, I moved to clay to sculpt, and I didn't know I could sculpt, and end up making a creation of, or let me say, a representation of his likeness with his hair blowing, because he said, "Mom, I have a passion for nature, and I love any experience that allows me to feel the wind on my face." So, anyway, thank you all for listening.
I just wanted to say that I've been told that when we go out into nature, she knows what we need, and the right birds, the right songs, the right wind, the right everything will be sent to you to hold you.
Then I have to tell you something else. I had and this may help y'all, I hope it will, because before he died, I was like what I thought a bridge between city life and a land trust on Mount Eagle Mountain. And I would get people together and we'd go, and I felt like I was putting them in the hands of a fella who lived on the land for the past 5 years at that time. He looked like my picture of John the Baptist. His hair was just all wild and everything. And we would take solo sites, and this man, when he found out my son had died, he came to me and he said, "Rose, I've never had this experience before." And he said, "But I went to Josh's solo site, and a hawk came in and gave me this message. And the message was, 'Mom, I didn't know how far my journey would take me. Continue to relate to me where I am now.'"
Mm-hmm. Wow.
And that was revolutionary to me, because I just thought when people died, they went somewhere else, or just not. I don't know what. But I've been sharing that ever since, this idea of continuing to relate. And it does happen, and it happens through nature. And I get messages from Josh all the time. If we can be open to it, it's available for us. I just want to share that with y'all. It helped with my healing a whole lot.
Well, first I want to thank you all for the conversation, this particular conversations, and all the conversations we've had. I am an observant Jewish woman who lives on the Pacific Coast, and I find this place, the festival, this home, when I come here, as my heart home. And I am so deeply touched and energized with the similarities of all of our traditions and where they coalesce. And I guess this is going to be a little bit on the feminine side. It's going to ramble just a little bit, but every time I come here, there's part of my heart that really hurts, because in this great wheel of life and in the wheel that we live on this earth, I think on the Pacific Coast and on much of the coast in New York, I know the work that Jewish women do with the many things on the coastal side of the United States. I was also struck with the image of the nature outside and the globe beside it. And I started to think and wonder, how can we as Jewish women be more part of the central part of the country? I think something is missing for me in that connection, and I'm not as well informed as I'd like to be. But I'd like to just ask you as the panel, how do you see us peripherally functioning, but being more part of the whole and part of this hoop, and where do we enter, if you have any ideas?
Are you asking about Jewish women in particular, or all women in the and you're talking about the physical center of the country?
I, as a woman, I want to be part of the Sophia century, or the Shekinah century, however you want to put it. But I think that there's something missing, probably something that could be done, maybe not something missing, on both sides. There's, as a Jewish woman, I want to be able to be out more. I want to bring things in more. I belong to a lot of interfaith and interracial organizations, but they look different on the coast. than they do when I come here? How could we be more a part of this great process?
Where do you live? Do you live here?
I live in Oregon, in Ashland, Oregon,
Uh-huh.
but I come here every year.
Uh-huh.
So
I was going to say, if you live here, you should start something. You'd be a great founder of the next whatever it is you're thinking of.
yeah, well, I bring I bring the ideas that I gain from the festival back to Oregon, and to my temple and to my community, and it's difficult for me to keep it alive alone.
The good thing about the internet is that you don't have to necessarily be alone. But as a Jewish woman, the unique things that you can bring, you probably already do this and you know. The Jewish calendar is a lunar calendar. It's a lunar solar calendar, but it marks the moon. And the cycles of the women, cycles of the moon, are highly intertwined. And so as far back as the biblical period, women had a special relationship with the new moon. And the new moon was their holiday. And Jewish women gathered around the new moon with prayer and song and food and story. And so that continues to this very day. And it's very easy to do. Again, you just pull people together and you do that celebrations. And again, there are all these resources that you can find on the web. And you could also do it, you can do it in cyberspace now. You can do it virtually. With others who are not quite there with you. And for example, you can start tonight. There's this tradition in Judaism, which the men have been using, but women can certainly begin to do and craft it in their own unique way, called Kiddush Levana, the blessing of the moon, which is that between the new moon and the full moon, one goes outside in the evening as the moon rises, and you offer blessings to the moon for its cycles and its renewal and its ebbing and its waxing, and then you have this sort of spiritual, prayerful, food-related. Always got to have food there. Celebration, and so if women can sort of reconnect through those cycles and the repetitive. I mean, a new moon, a new month comes every new month. Every 4 weeks comes every 4 weeks. So you can develop an ongoing relationship with women. You can do that both locally, and you can do it also through virtual. It's maybe a start.
And I'll just say something that someone said to me, which made a lot of sense to me. When you see something's missing, it's usually yours to provide.
I think we have time for just one question, and then we have our announcements and our moments of silence. So,
thank you. This has been really wonderful. Just a quick observation and then a question for Rabbi Cardin. I teach environmental theology and ethics in a Protestant seminary, and we spend a lot of time trying to recover from Scripture, from the hijackers, what's really there. And one of my students asked the question, we were looking at the Genesis story and about how God saw that it was good. And he said, well, what does it mean? I mean, all the commentators talk about it being good, but what does it mean that God saw that it was good? And as we unpacked that, we began to realize the power of seeing. Of opening our eyes and being receptive, and how important it is to people that they be seen. We saw yesterday the women talking about being loved, and that was so crucial to their recovery, that being seen for the gift that you are and the gifts that you have to offer others is so critical. So I'm beginning to think that's a very crucial theological category, that seeing others and in others the potential that's there helps to bring it out. Now, my specific question to the rabbi is, we can do pretty well with almost all the stuff that's been hijacked from Genesis 1 and 2, but what do you do with the word subdue it, which in Hebrew is kabash? I haven't been able to figure that out, and I'm hoping a good rabbi will help us.
I've got 1 minute, and I will tell you how I respond to that. Imagine that you are Adam and Eve. You wake up, strangers to this natural world, naked. You don't know what to eat, you don't have food, you don't have clothing, you don't have industry, you don't have culture, you don't have language, you don't have anything. If you are truly naked in a raw, natural world, you do want to make sure that you can manage, and you do want to be able to understand it and manipulate it appropriately and control it. Otherwise, it's either be eaten or manage. And so I see Genesis 1 as a very honest approach to how vulnerable the human species is alone and naked in a vast world, which has disease, and which has hunger, and which has animals, and which has bacteria, and has things that can actually harm us. We tend to think that nature is so loving and giving, and it is. But nature can also be very devastating. And so Genesis 1 is to remind us of the fragility and vulnerability and weakness of the human in face of the vastness of nature. And so the blessing at that point in Genesis 1 is understand nature, manage nature, be able to work with nature. But check, we've done that. We've done that almost to an obscene degree, although nature will still have the last word. Enter Genesis 2. Genesis 2 says it's no longer about kivshuha, it's no longer about dominion and domination, right? That's not where you are anymore. That's not where humans are anymore. We have lifted ourselves to look at where we are. We have lifted ourselves to a degree that we have already handled the subduing part as much as we should. And now we have to go to Genesis 2, which is l'ovda u'l'shamra, to work with it and to protect it and to preserve it and to be partners with it. So the Garden of Eden story is a story which is the corrective to Genesis 1, which we needed to begin. But the Genesis 2 story, the Garden of Eden story, is to say we must work in partnership with the earth, gently with the earth, right? Celebrating the earth, be humble with the earth. That's how I answer that question.
You know, I was very struck by that part of your talk also, actually, because I was thinking, what does it mean when God says, and it was very good? It was good, now it's very good. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I often summon that excitement that Creator had when Creator first began to dream of this and dream of us. And I ask to be a part of that showering of that excitement often in my prayers. But one of the things that it brought up for me is that for us, we say we came from original beauty. We didn't come from original sin. We came from original beauty. And so for me, when I hear that just acknowledgement from all of us that this is good. It began as good. It is good. And so to hear that affirmation, like from Creator, yes, that's right, this is good. And I'm a part of that. Right. That's how I feel it. And the other thing that I noticed about that was this sequencing of the days. And in it, you said, we're to make something even better. Mm-hmm. And I've been thinking about this a lot because I feel like this is part of the obsession of modern culture, which comes directly out of a linear thought process. So this sequencing of good, better, a little bit better, we can do more, and this leads to the more, we can do better, we can, and so I'm thinking about so much of our teaching from here is about this sequence moving off in this line that goes on indefinitely. But for Indigenous culture, it's moving like this. Mm-hmm. And so I would say that there are, I'll just stay with Danae, that the goal isn't to improve, and make it better. The goal is to receive this original beauty, to understand that I'm a part of it, and how do I keep, I guess if there's any participation, it's how do I keep making that beauty? How do I keep responding to beauty with beauty? So one of my elders said to me, you were born into beauty as beauty for joyful life. That's the truth. You were born into beauty as beauty for joyful life. And so the response to it is good is to respond as beauty with beauty. And that to me keeps leading us this way as opposed to this ever increasing sequence.
Thank you. Yeah.